Group CD 1 meter synchro competition, starting with Sophia Harris and Florence Brindley, Star Diving Club, Guildford. Erin Simmons and Emily Costello, City of Leeds Diving Club. Alice Morsky and Linnea Wilder, Dive London Aquatics Club. Darcy Napier-Ray and Olivia Leslie, Aberdeen Diving Club. Ella Duthie and Isla Berry, Aberdeen Diving Club. Beth Moxon and Ayla Jackson, City of Sheffield Diving Club. Daisy Costello and Flo Hall, City of Leeds Diving Club. And Casey Illingworth and Ruby Harris, Southend Diving and Amersham Swimming Club. Good luck to all our competitors. Please go and get yourselves ready. And with the referee's permission, we'll get started. Do we have a referee? Can we go? Okay, so our first divers are Sophia Harris and Florence Brindley, Star Diving Club, Guildford. Forward 1.5 somersaults, piked. Execution 5, 5, 6, 6. Synchronization 5, 6, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Erin Simmons and Emily Costello, City of Leeds Diving Club, inward dive, piked. Execution 5.5, 6.5, 5, 5.5. Synchronization 5.5, 6.5, 5, 5.5, 5. Alice Morsky and Linnea Wilder, Dive London Aquatics Club, inward dive, piked. Execution 7, 7, 6, 6. Synchronization, 5.5, 6, 5.5, 5, 6. Darcy Napier-Ray and Olivia Leslie, Aberdeen Diving Club, inward dive, piked. Execution, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5. Synchronization, 6, 7, 6.5, 5, 5. Ella Duthie and Isla Berry, Aberdeen Diving Club, inward dive, piked. Execution, 6.5, 7, 7, 6.5. Synchronization, 7, 8.5, 7, 7.5, 8. Beth Moxon and Ayla Jackson, City of Sheffield Diving Club, inward dive, piked. Execution, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Synchronization, 6, 7, 8.5, 7, 8.5. Daisy Costello and Flo Hall, City of Leeds Diving Club, inward dive, piked. Five and a half, 7, 6. Synchronization, 7.5, 7.5, 8.5, 8.5, 6.5. Casey Illingworth and Ruby Harris, Southend Diving and Amersham Swimming Club, forward dive, piked. Execution, 5.5, 5.5, 6.5, 6. Synchronization, 6, 7, 7.5, 8, 6. Round 2, Sophie and Florence, back dive with tuck. Execution, 4.5, 4.5, 5.5, 5. Synchronization, 6, 6, 7.5, 7.5, 7. Erin and Emily, reverse dive, piked. Execution, 5.5, 5, 6.5, 5.5. Synchronization, 6.5, 6, 6, 7, 6. Alice and Linnea, back dive with tuck. Execution, 6.5, 6, 5.5, 5. Synchronization 5, 6, 7, 5, 6. Darcy and Olivia, back dive pint. Execution 4.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6. Synchronization 5.5, 5.5, 6.5, 5, 6.5. Ella and Isla, forward dive pint. Execution 5, 5, 6.5, 6.5. Synchronization 5, 5, 6, 5, 5. Beth and Ayla, back dive pint. Execution 6, 5.5, 6.5, 5.5. Synchronization 7, 6, 5.5, 7.5, 8. Daisy and Flo, back dive with tuck. Execution 5.5, 5, 7, 6. Synchronization 6.5, 6.5, 7, 6.5, 7. Casey and Ruby, back dive pint. Execution 5.5, 5.5, 4.5, 5. Synchronization 6, 6.5, 7, 6.5, 6. We're on to round 3. Sophia and Florence, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 5, 5, 6, 5. Synchronization 5.5, 6, 5.5, 6, 6. Erin and Emily, inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 5.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Synchronization 6.5, 6, 5, 5, 5.5. Alice and Linnea, forward 1.5 somersaults, piked. Execution 5, 6, 5, 4.5. Synchronization 4, 4.5, 4, 4, 4.5. Darcy and Olivia, reverse dive, piked. Execution 5.5, 5, 6.5, 6. Synchronization 6.5, 5.5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. Ella and Isla, back dive, piked. Execution 6, 5.5, 5.5, 5. Synchronization 6, 6.5, 6, 7.5, 8. Beth and Ayla, forward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 5, 5, 4.5, 4.5. Synchronization 5.5, 5, 5, 5, 6. Daisy and Flo, forward 1.5 somersaults piked. Execution 4, 4.5, 4, 4.5. Synchronization 4.5, 4.5, 4.5, 5, 5.5. Casey and Ruby, forward double somersaults with tuck. Execution 5, 5, 5.5, 5.5. Synchronization 5.5, 5, 5, 5.5, 6. And we're on to the fourth and final round. Sophia Harris and Florence Brindley, Star Diving Club Guildford. Forward double somersaults with tuck. Five, 4.5, 4.5, 4. Synchronization 4.5, 4, 4, 4.5, 5. Erin Simmons and Emily Costello, City of Leeds Diving Club. Back 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 4.5, 4, 5, 5. Synchronization 4.5, 5.5, 4, 4, 4. Alice Morsky and Linnea Wilder, Dive London Aquatics Club. Inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 6, 5.5, 5, 6. Synchronization 5, 5.5, 5.5, 5, 5. Darcy Napier-Ray and Olivia Leslie, Aberdeen Diving Club. Forward 1.5 somersaults, piked. Execution 6.5, 6, 5, 4. Synchronization 5.5, 6.5, 5.5, 6, 5.5. Ella Duthie and Isla Berry, Aberdeen Diving Club. Forward double somersaults with tuck. Execution 4, 3.5, 4.5, 4.5. Synchronization 5, 6.5, 6.5, 7, 8.5. Beth Moxon and Ayla Jackson, City of Sheffield Diving Club. Inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 3.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5. Synchronization 5, 5.5, 5, 4.5, 6. Daisy Costello and Flo Hall, City of Leeds Diving Club. Inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 5, 5, 4.5, 4.5. Synchronization 5.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6.5, 6. And finally, Casey Illingworth and Ruby Harris, Southend Diving and Amersham Swimming Club. Inward 1.5 somersaults with tuck. Execution 4.5, 4.5, 6.5, 5.5. Synchronization 5, 6, 5, 5, 4. And that concludes the competition. Thank you, divers, coaches, team manager, officials, and volunteers. A reminder to athletes, no mobile phone use in changing rooms. And we will have the results of the last competition for you shortly. And a reminder that images from today's events are available through our official photographer, Will Johnston Photography. And ladies and gentlemen, we have the results for you of the female Group CD 1 meter synchro competition. And in 6th place, representing Dive London Aquatics Club, were Alice Morsky and Linnea Wilder with 128.79. Diving as guests, coming 7th overall, Darcy Napier-Ray and Olivia Leslie, Aberdeen Diving Club, with 129.45. Coming in 5th were Erin Simmons and Emily Costello, City of Leeds Diving Club, with 130.50. And 4th place went to Beth Moxon and Ayla Jackson, City of Sheffield Diving Club, with 133.62. And so our medalists: in 3rd place, Olivia Harris and Florence Brindley, Star Diving Club, 134.94. In 2nd place, Daisy Costello and Flo Hall, City of Leeds Diving Club, 140.37. And in 1st place were Casey Illingworth and Ruby Harris of Southend Diving and Amersham Swimming Club, with 141.78. And finally, diving as guests and coming in 1st overall, Ella Duthie and Isla Berry, Aberdeen Diving Club, with 142.38. So could the medalists make their way to the parade assembly area, please? And we will get that ceremony done as soon as possible. Ella, Isla, Casey, Ruby, Daisy, Flo, Sophia and Florence.